everyone. I'm so glad you could join us this evening for our children's message. I'm going to start out by sharing some Bible verses with you from Acts chapter 2, verse 14 and verses 22 through 32. Peter stood with the 11 apostles and spoke in a loud and clear voice to the crowd. Friends and everyone else living in Jerusalem, listen carefully to what I have to say. Now listen to what I have to say about Jesus from Nazareth. God proved that he sent Jesus to you by having him work miracles, wonders, and signs. All of you know this. God had already planned and decided that Jesus would be handed over to you. So you took him and had evil men put him to death on a cross. But God set him free from death and raised him to life. Death could not hold him in its power. What David said are really the words of Jesus. I always see the Lord near me, and I will not be afraid with him at my right side. Because of this, my heart will be glad, my words will be joyful, and I will live in hope. The Lord won't leave me in the grave. I am his Holy One, and he won't let my body decay. He has shown me the path to life, and he makes me glad by being near me. My friends, it is right for me to speak to you about our ancestor David. He died and was buried, and his tomb is still here. But David was a prophet, and he knew that God had made a promise he would not break. He had told David that someone from his own family would someday be king. David knew this would happen, and so he told us that Christ would be raised to life. He said that God would not leave him in the grave or let his body decay. All of us can tell you that God has raised Jesus to life. Do you know what a witness is? A witness. It is a person who has seen an event and can tell what has happened. The sermon that Peter preaches in this passage reminds the listeners that they had seen the wonderful things Jesus had done, and that they had seen Jesus had been put to death. Everyone had witnessed the life and death of Jesus, but only the disciples were witnesses that God had raised Jesus. They had seen and talked with him. I want you to keep this in mind when I share a book with you. Ralph Tells a Story by Abby Hanlon.
Ralph Tells a Story by Abby Hanlon. Ralph Tells a Story by Abby Hanlon. My teacher always said, stories are everywhere. And the kids in my class were always finding them. Then my mom ran so fast that she caught up with the ice cream truck. I ran down the hallway with my underwear on my head. After that, I decided to hide my Halloween candy in my bed. The dentist forgot to give me a toothbrush. Yay, stories, stories! But every day at writing time, I thought really hard. I stared at my paper. I stared at the ceiling. I could not write a story. I have no story. Then Grandma gave me a cup of coffee and said, "Don't tell your mother." So I looked for other things to do. I went to the water fountain. I roamed the hallways. Can I go to the bathroom? Again? I tried everything. Can I go help the lunch ladies? What? Then one day, after getting sent back to my desk, I begged Daisy for help. I can't write a story because nothing happens to me. Are you kidding? She said. I've written a ton of stories about you. She began pulling her stories out of her desk. Look at this one, she said. Remember the time you let me brush your hair? And this one, remember the time you knocked down all the crayons? Oh, and remember the time you painted your nails with a black marker? I thought, I'll never be a great writer like Daisy. Then Daisy stapled all her stories together. Click, click. Wow, she said. This book is already 13 pages. Click, click. Can I use the stapler? I asked. I was really good at stapling. But you have nothing to staple, said Daisy. You have to find a story first. Just look around. So I looked for stories out the window, in the aquarium, in my desk. Why do you have socks in your desk? And when my teacher wasn't looking, I looked for stories on the floor. But still, no stories. That's my favorite part. Look, my next book. Lying under my desk reminded me of lying in the grass at the park. I closed my eyes and imagined I was at the park. Just like that time, a little inchworm crawled on my knee. The sun was shining right into my eyes. Squinting, I picked up the wiggly inchworm and looked at it close up. And that's when my teacher found me. What's your story about? She asked. I opened my eyes. I saw an inchworm. Wonderful, she said. I can't wait to read what you wrote. But there was no inchworm story. I sat down and tried to write about the inchworm, but right away I got stuck. Do you know any inchworm stories? I asked Daisy. She just rolled her eyes and kept on writing. Then my teacher said, Writers, come to the rug, time to share. Ralph, why don't you go first? Said the teacher. I pretended that I had lost my paper. Please, me. Oh, pick me. It didn't work. He's sitting on it. I walked to the front of the rug. It took a long time. I held my paper against my chest so no one could see it. I was at the park, I said. An inchworm crawled on my knee. It was quiet. My heart went thump, 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 thump. That's when I looked at Daisy. Wow, really? Did it feel squishy, Ralphie? Did you take it home? And then everyone started asking me questions. Did your mom let you keep it? Did you touch it? Was it a baby? Was it a girl? Did it tickle? Did you name it? Wait a minute, I thought. Something did happen with that inchworm. Well, I picked up the inchworm and decided to name him Nick. I built Nick a house, but he just inched away. So I followed him, which is why I didn't notice that someone was following me. And then, all of a sudden, this wobbly, crazy baby grabbed Nick and put him in his... diaper. I tried to be calm. Come on, baby, I said really nicely. Give Ralphie the inchworm. It didn't work. Was this the end of Nick? But then I noticed Nick was escaping. He crawled right up the baby's stomach. Quickly, I rescued Nick and ran. And we spent the rest of the afternoon doing nothing together. The end. Everyone clapped and cheered. "Show the picture, Ralph," someone said. "Wonderful! Hooray! Yay, Ralph!" I wasn't embarrassed anymore, so I did it. That was last year. This year, I write stories all the time. I keep finding stories everywhere. This book might be too thick to staple. Writing tips from Ralph. 1. Get comfortable. 2. It's okay to ask for help. 3. You can always write about what you had for breakfast. 4. Eat lots of chocolate. Books by Ralph. The end.
In the book, when Ralph's class is asked to write stories, Ralph thinks he has nothing to say. Ralph did all kinds of things to get out of writing a story. One day, Ralph remembers a time when he found an inchworm, but he can't think of how to turn that into a story, how to write about it. Ralph's teacher calls him up to share a story, and unfortunately, Ralph only has one line. But luckily, Ralph's classmates ask enough questions, and that reminds Ralph he does have something to say about the experience he shared with the inchworm. He begins to tell his story, and it's a good story. At the end of this book we just read, you see pages from all the stories that Ralph has now been able to write about. Things he has seen, things he's done and experienced. Ralph becomes a good witness for what he has experienced. Suppose the disciples had failed to be witnesses. What would we do if they hadn't told about their experiences? How would we know Jesus today? What story about Jesus could you share? Why don't you discuss that with your families? I'd love to know what story about Jesus you could share. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.